press the audio on?
Yes. Do you want me to stop the recording for a little bit?
No, it's fine. We can edit out whatever we need to.
Okay.
And your mic is the right mic on that.
Let me check.
Be fine.
Just hit the audio options.
Yeah, computer audio connected.
You can press it there.
Woohoo! Yes.
Okay, cool.
All right, so my name is Rodrigo Morales, and I'm going to talk to you today about thinking statefully and reusable state with HOC components. HOC basically stands for higher order components. So who here has experience with React or has worked on a simple app or a professional app? Okay, so I would say everybody here has used the React state, right? So what is state? I found there's 3 different definitions, but they all sum up into the same concept. So state is what allows you to create components that are dynamic and interactive. Another definition is that it is used to store information or data about the component that can change over time, but typically that change comes as a result of an event or like a user input or a server request or the passage of time, such as a set timeout or a set interval. And also another definition is the state is similar to props, but it is private and fully controlled by the component. So let's see an example of the use of the state. So here we have like a simple React component. And here we're declaring our component state. This is basically an ES6 implementation of defining your state. You don't need to define it in your constructor if you define your state as a type. So you basically define the properties of your state with their respective data type. And then you just assign the property state inside your component class with the state type, and then the values assigned to it. So this is a simple example of a sidebar container where basically the state is being used to display the sidebar by the toggle sidebar event, which basically just toggles the is sidebar open property from the component state. So how to develop a stateful or declarative thinking. So basically, if you're used to call functions to trigger animations or events, basically imperative programming such as jQuery, you need to adjust your mindset in order to work effectively with React. So my best way to explain this was with an example, and it's basically contrasting how you would toggle the sidebar with jQuery and how you would do it with React, thinking in a stateful way. So the imperative solution with jQuery would be that you would bind to on-click events to the sidebar element, and with a button you would trigger like on-click to hide and show the sidebar element. So this is like very old. It still makes the same functionality, but we can improve it with React by putting the state of the sidebar in the component. And the solution doing it with React would be that we consider the sidebar open or closed as a property from the component state. So it would be either in the open or closed state. And if it's open, then we render the sidebar, and if it's closed, we just simply don't render it. And moreover, we can pass a onClose callback to the sidebar, and then in this way, the parent component gets to decide what happens when the user clicks on close or open. And we also follow the good practice of just having a functional component and having a dummy component, which would just display, and the other one would be in charge of the functional behavior. So this would be the example where basically if the is sidebar open is defined, is set to true, and then the sidebar is defined, that it would render it, otherwise it wouldn't. So for that, I have a couple of examples here. So can everybody see it? Okay, so this would be the imperative way of doing it with jQuery, where it's not too trivial. We just have a sidebar element and a button outside of the sidebar and a button inside the sidebar. Each one of them would close it or open it. So doing it with jQuery, like I said, we would initially hide the sidebar, and then through CSS selectors, we would bind on the onclick of the open sidebar button, which is this one. And then on the onclick, we would hide the button and display the sidebar. And then for the button that is inside, we would hide the sidebar and then show the button that would open it. So fairly simple, but let's do it in a stateful way with React. So in here, sorry, show the HTML. If you see your HTML, it's reduced in the index. You just have the root element where you would hook your React application into. And here you would have your sidebar component, which is basically a dummy component. It just bubbles up an event. And then we have our sidebar container, which would be the parent component that in this case would be the functional component, would decide when to display the sidebar or not. So in here we have our state, which is sidebar open, and the method that would toggle the state. So that this toggle sidebar method would be binded to the onClose event of the sidebar and also to the onClick event of the button. So we achieve the same functionality, but it's way much more performant, and you're doing it in a stateful way.
Feel free to ask questions at any time.
Yeah.
As well.
Okay, so now the second topic of the meetup, which is reusable state with higher order components. So what is a HOC? A higher order component is basically a component that takes another component as an argument and returns a new one that's modified in some way. So HOC components, right? It sounds a little bit crazy. So think of a higher order component as a higher order function, which is a fancy name of a function that accepts another function as an argument and returns another function or a value. And we use it in every day with JavaScript. For instance, array.map or set timeout. We pass a function and it returns a value, or we can even return another function as a result. So these are functions that accept another function as an argument. So one of the clear examples of higher order components would be Redux Connect. Has any of you worked with Redux before? Cool. So for the ones that haven't worked with Redux, it's basically a way to manage data in your application and make it connected across your components. So if you're familiar with Redux, you're already using HOCs. So for example, this is an example of how Connect is used with Redux. So in here, we have a to-do list. And the to-do list is basically calling Connect and passing the component over here. And this returns a new component with the modified props. So this is a very clear example of higher order components.
And next is actually a higher ordered function that returns
Yeah.
A higher order component.
Triple
Correct.
ordered component?
Yeah, a triple higher order component.
Yeah, so the return of connect is a higher order component.
Yeah.
Which is why you can see that at the end there, you're passing in a component to the return value of connect.
Yeah. So
It's a higher order, or,
this is an example of using connect in a React application. So this is basically the action, the counter action that basically increments or decrements the state value, and then we have the counter component that basically returns the buttons to increase the amount and decrease the amount, and here we display the value on the state. And we have our map state to props and map dispatch to props methods, which are basically the ones that dispatch the actions of increment and decrement that we can see over here from the counter. And here is the implementation of connect. So like Mike said, it's a higher order function where we're passing map state to props and map dispatch to props. And then it returns a function where we pass our component, and that returns a new component with the Redux store injected on it. So here's an example where it's triggering the increment and triggering the decrement. So yeah, so that's the example of Redux using connect as a higher order component. Okay, so how can you implement higher order components? So this is the higher order component structure. It's fairly simple. So here we have our higher order component function, which returns a function that takes a component as an argument. So here we're expecting a wrapper component. And then it creates a new wrapper component, which we're defining here our wrapper component class. And then we're returning the same component that was passed through the argument, but with its properties modified, right? And like it says here, remember, it takes a component and returns a new component. So we have to return the class. We just don't have to define it. We need to return it. So here's a study case. So in this case, we have two components that make use of the same user data. So the only difference is that one is focused to display a admin user type data, and the other one is focused on displaying a editor user type data, right? So in both of the components, we have the same state. We have the same component mount method, which is basically making an API request to get the user information from the user ID passed through the properties. And then in the render method, there's a common thing, which is the display of a loader component when the user is not defined. And the only thing that differs is just the template. So this is a clear example of where we can implement higher order components and basically abstract component mount, the state, and the rendering of a loader. So the first step to start working on your higher order components is identifying the duplicate code. Like I said, the similar things are the state, component mount, and the rendering of the loader. So then the last step is we wrap the duplicate code in a higher order component, and then we have more performant components, and we just have to maintain one code base. And it's not repeated across our components in our application. So for that, I have an example, which I want to show it here. This basically the admin user component and the editor user component. So in the code here, so I'm displaying right now the admin user details. Let me zoom that. Admin user details component, which is implementing the HOC, and the editor user details component that is also implementing the HOC. And I'm passing here the user ID property. So how is this being implemented? So if we come and look at the admin user details with HOC, it's fairly simple. It's just returning the template and expecting a user in the props. And the key point is basically here where we're calling our load user HOC. And it's a function that returns a function that expects a component as an argument and returns a new modified component. So also the editor user details with HOC is the same thing. The only difference is the content of the template. So if we go to our load user HOC, I use the same structure that I showed you before. And as we can see, here's the load user function that returns a function that expects a component and returns a new component, right? So if you see, I'm defining my state over here, which has the user defined as null initially, so we can display the loader. And then in component did mount, I'm calling the request user method, which is basically making a get request and defining the user in the state. And in our render method, we are pulling the user from the state, and the same repeated code we had before. If the user is not defined, we will display loading, and if it is defined, then it will just return the component that we received as an argument, but with its props, which now is the user. So instead of having the user as a state in our editor user and admin user details components, is now being passed as a property. And this is a fancy way of implementing your higher order components, which you can know at the moment of debugging what component is failing. So if we wouldn't do this, it would always display the name of the component that is failing as loader user. But by doing this, we can identify that it could be the editor user or the admin user details, the one that is failing. And finally, we just return the component, which is our higher order component, the loader user. So let me display you the results. So I'm gonna put side by side each one of them. Right, so both of them receive the same properties, but the only difference is that the core functionality is shared. As if we compare the editor user details, it's making the definition of the state and the request. And that code is repeated in the admin user details. It's a very clear example of the need of a HOC component and to abstract these parts basically. So as you can see, both of them display the same data, but they're being used, the top ones are being used with the higher order component, and they're sharing the same code base. Okay, so what's next, and how do you follow up with thinking in a stateful way and using reusable state with higher order components? So after you start writing a couple of higher order components, you will start noticing patterns all over, and you start noticing in your code how you can start refactoring your components. So you will start treating these as another tool in your abstraction toolbox to reduce your duplicate code. So my recommendation would be look at your code, look at your components, find parts where you could abstract code and put it in a higher order component. And eventually you're going to start seeing things more clearly, and your React app is going to start being developed in a more maintainable and performant way. So I want to give credits to Dave's idea, which was basically where I started getting a lot of information about React. And actually these two topics came from two of his posts that he made last month. And if you guys are interested in learning more about React, that's a really good source of information. He has tutorials, and he provides information for very low level, nothing too complex, and it's very straightforward. And that's it. If anybody has questions, this would be a good time.
Can we see the that app with the higher order traction one time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to see the code?
Yeah.
What do you want to see?
Yeah, the use of the higher order component.
So it would be the admin user details over here. Yeah, so this is basically where everything's going on.
So what's like the difference between doing this and just like the normal React composing? Like, why wouldn't you just import the admin user details component into
Extend it?
Yeah, or no, not extend it, just like put it into a parent component. Or there's something.
But how would you benefit from putting it into a parent component? Oh, you mean like having a component that fetches the user and then renders the admin user and the edit user? Yeah, in the scenario I put it here, yes, that would be very straightforward. But the thinking, imagine this, each one of these, it's its own route. So you would have like my app / user / editor / ID. And that would render the editor user container, right? And then you would have user / admin / ID, and that would render the admin user container, right? So these two would be like your containers, and that would render like a series of elements. Just for the sake of making this simple, I didn't put like, imagine the admin users has a relationship of users. So then you would display here like
so
users list table, right? And then for the editor user, instead of you displaying a users list table, you would display like posts table, right? What you're doing from here is you're just abstracting the code that is requesting the user, but you don't need to depend on a parent component to display both of them and then have to play with your state to see which one you render and which one you hide. So this is just a very simple example, and probably it doesn't, it might seem more simple just to put both of them in one component and then just make one user request. But the idea is, and you can even see it here, is that the admin user has the user ID 1 and the editor user has the user ID 2. So if you would have it both in one, then you wouldn't need to expect like an array of user IDs and then fetch the user IDs, and based off of that, you have to identify if it's an admin or an editor.
Another time we used it is we used FormZ, the React library, and then we wanted to add a bunch of functionality to it to handle like nested relationships.
Yeah.
So we created a high-ordered form component that just wrapped FormZ and then passed it a bunch of actions.
Yeah, so you would pass it like the form property, and the form property would be like the structure of your form, whatever elements you wanted to display, whatever fields you wanted to display. And the FormZ form HOC component, that was the name. And that one would basically handle the submit request and would do validations. We even implemented a portion that would just pick the dirty fields, because we use that same HOC for creation and editing. So you could pick the dirty fields off of your form object. But all of that core functionality was just in the HOC component. So then you didn't need to worry about replicating all of that in all of your form components. Anybody else?
Can I add one question? You kind of said something about performance using jQuery versus React. So can you tell me how, when you talk about performance, you said it'd be more performant to use React in some of these scenarios. What makes it more performant?
First of all, you're not hooking onto events of the DOM to trigger an action.
How does React deal with that then without having to hook into it? Am I asking too deep of a question?
No, that's okay.
Start the next talk.
Yeah.
So imagine that React hooks to the element. So with React, you're creating your element. With jQuery, you need the markup in order to make it functional.
Now I'm thinking, that's
Yeah. And for example, this editor user in jQuery, that would probably be either like 8 files or just one file with like 500 lines on it, And with React, I feel it's more ordered and it's more specific onto what you're doing. And one of the definitions was that the state is specific to the component. So with jQuery, you're seeing everything, I feel.
Yeah, that's the problem with jQuery, obviously.
Yeah, which still gets the job done, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But
anybody who's worked with jQuery long enough knows it.
yeah, and one simple thing is just look at the size of the library. Like React is almost nothing, and if you compare it to jQuery,
React is actually smaller than jQuery.
yeah, way much smaller.
I never really paid much attention.
Well, it will also depend on the stack of dependencies that you start building, because if it's a very robust React application, you're probably going to have more than 100 dependencies, right? But then again, jQuery doesn't cover it all, so you're also going to need dependencies on it. Yeah.
And performance-wise, it's they're using the virtual DOM, like different algorithms and stuff that are, those are just more performant than what your standard jQuery application is able to do.
Yeah.
And that, that's nothing to do with listening to DOM events. That's just an algorithm.
Yeah, exactly. Because I understand the thing. I'm just trying to score points to see if it's worth converting some old jQuery stuff I'm working on now to just say, okay, let's just swap it out now. But I hate to have to go through and convert the whole thing to this style, but it's more performant.
Yeah.
Then it starts to make more sense. But
yeah. In my opinion, honestly, I don't it depends on your application, obviously, but we don't run into too many performance. It's we use it more because we really like what React gives you from a developer standpoint. value functional programming. Like, just we like the workflow. Most, not some of our clients run into where they actually needs that performance boost, but like most of them, it's not a big deal.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And I'm
Trying
sure
to
when you run
convince
it,
someone, I would go with the cost of maintaining it will be a lot lower, especially if you have an old jQuery app. Like, how much time are you spending fixing the same things over and over?
so it's
And then
like
also like the availability of new technology. No one's developing anything for jQuery.
yeah.
And like, if you want to hire another developer, do you think anyone wants to come on your team to work on an old jQuery app?
Yeah, exactly.
Like those are the arguments I would use.
So what do you guys do then when you run into an app that's already using jQuery? There's a lot of libraries where you're stuck. It requires jQuery. How do you balance that and say, okay, well, we're going to run both of them.
No, there's plenty of
Yeah.
say but it's not switched off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying when for clean code, you don't really want to be pulling in jQuery and using React and using the modules that are designed for jQuery over here and stuff that's designed for React over here. It doesn't make sense. It's like me running curl with my Rails app. Who's going to do that? It doesn't make sense. There's two things, they both do kind of the same thing. You want to pick the one that's, you kind of got to pick one or the other.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a business decision.
Yeah.
At that point, it's like, are you planning on like doing a ton of development on this, like that kind of thing? If you're planning on doing incremental little pieces of it, then it probably makes sense to keep continuing jQuery. If you're planning on doing a massive amount of development, and that's where you might get the benefit.
You run into issues where things that you need are only available using jQuery, or you typically steer away from that one way or another. Things like if you needed a specific jQuery type library that does a specific action. They say if you found something that there's not something built for React, it does something maybe with images or whatever. Would you just say, okay, we're just going to write it around in React?
Yeah. I mean, we would do that, but we don't, honestly, like, the React community is big enough now that we haven't run into that problem in a long time. React Native, we're still running into things that we have to build ourselves because it's newer. But React Web is pretty robust. Has anybody ran into it recently where you had found something in jQuery that wasn't in React?
We ran into that issue more with Ember, and Ember has a big community, and React, not at all. Yeah.
I'm just one of those kind of guys always looking for a better way to do things. It's always,
Yeah.
We all are, looking for a better, smoother, cleaner, more.
Yeah, and also more.
New app to work on, it sounds like.
Well, I got plenty of apps to work on. I always got plenty of stuff to work on. It's just, you get into these positions where anybody who's written enough jQuery and it just starts adding up. It's hard to, it's hard to follow. It gets hard to follow because you have all these different handlers, and you kind of start wondering when you're doing your tests, and you're wondering, where is that? I got 37 files, start searching for it, start looking for, then you got to start tracing things backwards.
Most of all, you can still have pretty organized jQuery.
Yeah, you route it. Well, that's assuming you wrote it, or
Right,
when it's somebody else who wrote it, and you're trying to figure out what they were trying to accomplish. At least with React, in a way, you can still screw it up. But
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
can screw it up. But it's about having that framework where you can follow things and logically put things in an order where it's easier to follow for the next developer to come along. Because I'm working on a big Rails project in Reuse, and it's all jQuery. And a lot of the code were written by the original developers, and the owner of the company wrote some of it. And then I'm coming along and just kind of scratching my head going, how hard is it to just kind of like spread things out, put some comments in there maybe, remove stuff that's not being used anymore.
Yeah. There's a React Ruby project, right?
Yeah.
You talked about it last month.
The new Rails,
the new Rails,
the new Rails it's pretty. know if you guys use it, but it's definitely, I love it, because now I'm using the Webpack and everything with it, and it's, we just converted some projects to the Res 5 with the Webpack and pulling all the JavaScript out into the front. That's why I was wondering, right now might be the time to just kind of start dumping the jQuery stuff and say, okay, right now I'm in the middle of a messaging app, and right now it'd be perfect to just take this piece of it and, okay, we're gonna put this in an instant messenger and start one piece at a time, piecing it together instead of like what I'm doing now with just handlers and jQuery and trying to just.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty good sign that PHH gave in and took on React. Like, I mean, he was like the most vehemently against like JavaScript frameworks forever. And like now he's like Webpack and like React and Rails. Like that's a pretty big move.
Yeah, I don't know if you've used it yet.
Yeah, I did a talk on that. Exactly.
Okay.
Class.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it's really nice. I mean, I prefer to have just API and have your own React client, like a lot, much more.
That's where I'm actually kind of headed with. Like I said, I'm coming in when the project was done at one point. They decided they want to add a bunch of new features onto it, so now I'm coming in to kind of help out, try to get these features put in, and taking all this old existing code. And let me tell you, they just everything's in the Rails, everything's a redirect. There's no to try to convert everything.
How's
back.
the Ruby code outside of the views?
Pretty bad.
I was gonna say, I mean, a lot of times we'll suggest just opening up, converting the controllers, or opening up an API and then just building client fresh with a new React, and it's like 9 days.
I suggest to start from scratch.
Start from scratch, yeah.
That was my suggestion. I said, hey, let's take this thing. Let's just start over. Oh, we can't do that.
Yeah.
All right, run, y'all. Thanks
All
for
right,
the talk, Rodrigo.
All right, sure, man.
Nice to meet you
Thanks for
guys.
staying.
Rodrigo, can you talk about what is this app that you're using here?
Oh yeah, so this is called Glitch, and this was made by I don't remember his name right now, but it was the guy who built Trello. Trello, which is for project management. So he built this, and it's super neat because it's spin up every time you click a new project, a container where you can basically develop Node.js, JavaScript, or you can get very savvy. You can do Python and other languages. But yeah, it's basically like an Express server. We have an Express server right now.
Oh, that's awesome.
And you also have client files. The one that I made for this is basically a running. Well, right now I just loaded this one. So yeah, you can show live, and you come over here, you can see what's going on. So this is, I think this is like a to-do app or something. Yeah, it just keeps on adding stuff. And it auto saves for you. You can have Npm packages. So it's even neater now than when I started using it, because now you can just search an Npm package and, for example, just type React, display it over here, you click it, it installs it. You have even logs where you can debug what's going on in your container. One of the requests I made in the forum is to have the option to SSH into the container, but I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
Not yet.
And the community it's very strong, and they even implement like really cool features. Like, for example, where do you have this? You have an error, it identifies it. Oh, it's probably not here. Let's see. Oh, it's so slow. My client JS, if I have like, so for example, I have an error here, and if I click it, I think it's here. There you go. So this little icon pops up, and I can ask the community from here, and it even adds like a tag based on the file. You can ask for
You can
help.
click the link and go straight to.
Yeah, and they can have access to your container if in case they need to check it or modify something. And the cool thing is that if you have protected information in your .env, it is really protected. It's only you, the one who can see it. So nobody else can have access to it.
Nice.
So yeah, it's a pretty neat app.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I think I have to.
And they also, I mean, that serves up to that link right there.
Yeah. So if you click show live, it opens basically this. And it has like the name of your container, that glitch, that me. And you basically have a live app running. And everybody can see it. What else? Yeah, and you can get rid of this very easy. Like you can remix this, they call it, but it's basically copy a container. And you can switch between your projects over here. So if I want to go back to the React project, it'll just refresh everything. And it will even refresh the tab that had the app running.
How's the editor itself though?
It's a little bit annoying because it auto saves on every single change you do, but I think there's a way to disable it. The only thing is that you have to kick it off manually.
Does it like have completion, that kind of stuff?
I think it does have completion. If, for example, if I define a function on top of it and then I'm using it below, it will have it. But let's say if you're using a library and autocomplete for a library, it won't do that.
Do they have a Git? They also make.
Yeah, it exports to Git actually.
So yeah, can you push to it?
Yeah.
With Git?
Yeah.
Oh man, that's really cool.
So what's the option for Git? I think it had it because I have it connected to my Git account. It's somewhere here.
So where would you put
Your private. Oh, you log in with Git.
Oh,
and you give it access to your repo or project or whatever you're working on. There's something here. Yeah, I think it's.
That's cool. We can.
Yeah, somewhere in there, there was the
figure
Git option. I remember. Yeah, probably in the
Advanced?
Git advanced options. Yeah, import. Yeah, so you can import a project or export it to GitHub. You can also download it, and it'll give you like a zip file, and you can just delete it too. So yeah, it's pretty neat. It's way much better than last year. Last year was very simple.
Preferred editor at this point?
Well, I started using it because I would follow up tutorials, and I didn't like to spin up a whole server in my local and then have it. And this way, you can just kick off a new container, and you have everything ready. And you can put it in your GitHub or download it, whatever you want to do. Yeah. Well, I wouldn't put a big project on there. I don't know, just for security's sake, so everybody can see it. But yeah, if you need to like.
But even if you're just working on part of the project,
Yeah, or if you need to pair program, because I can give somebody access to this, and they can also edit it at the same time I'm editing it. Yeah. Yep. That's pretty much.
You want to show them what I use decorators? I ordered component decorators.
Oh, with Connect.
With the at sign.
Yeah, but you can use Connect with the at sign. I think we were using it. Do we have that?
What?
Because I don't have
we
a
use
simple
it
app.
in some apps, yeah.
Like what?
Oh, just where you're using the in this app, you can just show them what it looks like with the decorator.
I don't know if it will load the decorator here.
No, it probably won't, but you can show them.
Yeah, so in here, if you wanted to use the load user HOC as a decorator, like Mike said, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike. You like this?
Yep, and then you would move the export up to the class.
It might work. Let's see. like this.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see if it works.
Doesn't like it.
Yeah, I didn't like it. Sorry?
You might have to change your Babel-RC file.
With Babel, right? Yeah. I don't think I have Babel. Yeah.
That's all right, but yeah, that's if you want to be
Yeah.
fancy and
Use the decorator.
sometimes.
That's you just do it like this.
How did you test your load user HOC? If you wanted to write an enzyme test for that without relying on
The other components.
Yeah.
You would mount it and just pass like a test component to it.
Yeah.
That's how I would do it. You just pass a test component that expects a user in the props. And then you would mount it, and you would also, depending on the API for test, I would mock the request just to return a dummy object and then just validate it. And then, yeah, pretty much it.
What do you use for test JS components?
For the last project that I worked on, we were using, what was it, Mike? Mocha?
Yeah, mostly we use Jest and Enzyme.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, yeah, that's our preferred.
We were, the other one we were using Mocha and Nightwatch, right?
Yeah, that was for end-to-end.
Yeah,
that one had a more robust end-to-end
yeah.
framework. But yeah, for testing the actual components themselves, we use Jest and Enzyme.
What we can test?
What can you test?
What?
Yeah, so in the test, you would mount it and then you would pass it the properties, or you would set state, because like everything's either going to be passed in or handled through a state change of some sort, or most things in React. So you would render and mount your component, and then you would you pass the properties that you want to it, and then you would change the state, because the enzyme gives you the ability to change, you could set state you could mount it and then set state, and then you would change it to what you want, and then you could verify that it looks a certain way, or it's rendered itself in the right way. There's snapshot testing, which will take a snapshot of what your rendered function is going to look like, and so you can say my rendered function is going to look like this and it's going to have the built-out HTML given your your scenario. So it'll be if I pass these props and then I set this particular state, the render function, the actual function that's going to be rendered inside the DOM looks like this. And then it'll take a snapshot and it'll keep that string in a file, and it will validate that when, the next time you run the suite, it'll validate that given those scenarios, that component will render exactly the same.
You do test on the state and props, or use test?
Yeah, you can test. You can test that the state, given something, the state is in this state, or the props look like this. Yeah. So.
Any other questions?
What do you use for backend meter for frontend, and what do you use for
No, we won't use Meteor. You would just do a plain React app, like a boilerplate with certain dependencies that would provide you. The backend would work with Node.js and
Node, Ruby, Python, PHP. It's any lots of different backends. But our preferred backend is Node, so we can keep the same syntax. If we get a client and we get to make all the technology decisions, we use Node and React and Redux as the stack. But every client's different, and they have a Python team, or whatever. They have Python apps, so they want to stay with Python, the API, and we want to just write it in Python.
You have a preferred Node framework for backend?
We just use Express, and we have our own, we use Sequelize as the ORM, or we'll use like a graph API or both. But we keep it pretty simple. But it's like Node Express, and then we usually write our own router, or write the router logic, and then just have like the ORM for the wrapper, and it's mostly standard stuff. And then everything else is just like an abstracted service function of for the rest of the logic.
You guys done like a lot of server-side rendering with React?
We've built a couple. We've done like Next, and we tried several other ones, but Next seems to be the only one that's like got it close. Like I've personally found it more work than it's worth to do server-side rendering, especially for the benefit, because like I said, we don't run into performance issues that often. Like it's not, if you're writing code for Facebook, like that's, they're obviously going to have those concerns where they need to like render the basic components. Like they need to render that initial payload really, really, really quickly, and then they need to fill the rest in multiple packets that come afterwards. We have those sometimes, but that's not the main use case. So we just don't need to solve that problem, and it adds a ton of complexity to be rendering on both sides. So,
Is there any other options for like making it more SEO friendly or anything like that? Other server-side rendering?
yeah, that's probably the best bet. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of tricks, but if you really care about SEO, then like you might have to take that, bite the bullet. Yeah.
Ooh,
Do you use middleware and Redux?
middleware.
Middleware.
What do you mean by that? Like,
I don't know, because
Yeah, we use Thunk. Yeah, and I mean we use some middlewares. Thunk is probably the most used middleware that we do use.
For what purpose this program?
Well, so Thunk, we use Thunk because Redux is not it's synchronous. It's not asynchronous. So you can't have an asynchronous function in Redux without Thunk middleware. It'll throw an error. So Thunk like handles that asynchronous for you. But there's a lot of different middlewares, and we use them for different purposes. That's probably the main. We use the Thunk middleware in all of our apps because all of our React apps use make API calls in the actions. So you have to handle that in some way.
alrighty. No more questions? Thanks for coming.